The night the millionaire walked into the small coastal restaurant, no one imagined that a single sentence would shatter the foundations of his perfectly constructed world. Alejandro Rivas was a man accustomed to silence when he entered a room. Respectful, fearful silence. His tailored suit, his cold gray eyes, and the quiet authority in his posture announced wealth long before anyone recognized his face from business magazines. He owned hotels, construction companies, and half the shoreline where that humble restaurant stood. Yet he had never stepped inside it before. He had come that evening not for pleasure but to close a deal. He intended to buy the property, demolish it, and build a luxury resort. For him, it was just another transaction. For the staff, it was the possible end of everything. Camila, the young waitress assigned to his table, had heard the rumors all week. The owner had cried in the kitchen. The cooks whispered about losing their jobs. But Camila needed the job more than anyone. Her mother was sick, medical bills piled high, and every tip mattered. So she approached Alejandro's table with a professional smile that masked the storm in her chest. When she set down his coffee, her sleeve slipped slightly, revealing a small, delicate tattoo on her wrist, a crescent moon wrapped around a tiny star. Alejandro's hand froze mid-air. The cup trembled in his grasp. He stared at her wrist as if he had seen a ghost. Camila noticed his gaze and instinctively pulled her sleeve down. "Is something wrong, sir?" she asked softly. Alejandro's voice, usually steady and commanding, came out strained. "That tattoo? Where did you get it?" Camila hesitated, confused by the intensity in his eyes. "My mother has the same one," she replied carefully. "She said it was a promise she made long ago." The air between them thickened. Alejandro leaned back slowly, his mind racing through memories he had buried for 25 years. A small apartment, a woman with gentle laughter, a promise under the moonlight. The exact same symbol, sketched on a napkin during a time when he had nothing but ambition and love. "What is your mother's name?" he demanded, almost whispering. "Lucia Morales," Camila answered. The color drained from Alejandro's face. "Lucia?" The name echoed like thunder in his head. He had loved a Lucia once, before money, before power, before betrayal. Or what he had believed was betrayal. He remembered leaving town after discovering she was pregnant, convinced she had chosen another man. His pride had been stronger than his love. He never looked back. Until now. Camila watched as the powerful businessman seemed to shrink before her eyes. For the first time, she saw not a millionaire, but a man haunted. Alejandro paid the bill without finishing his coffee. Before leaving, he said quietly, "I need to meet your mother." Camila's heart pounded. "Why?" she asked. Alejandro met her gaze, and there was something fragile there. "Because if I'm right, everything I believed about my past was a lie." That night, Alejandro didn't sleep. He searched through old boxes in his mansion, found faded photographs, and there it was, the drawing of the crescent moon and star. He had created it as a symbol of eternal connection. He had told Lucia that no matter how dark the night, the moon and star would find each other. And now, decades later, that symbol had found him. If this story is already touching your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more powerful stories about love, secrets, and destiny that can change everything in a single moment. The following afternoon, Alejandro stood outside a modest house on the outskirts of town, his heart pounding harder than during any business negotiation of his life. The mansion, the cars, the empire he had built, all of it felt meaningless compared to the uncertainty of the next few minutes. Camila opened the door cautiously. She had barely spoken to him since the night before, unsure whether to trust him. "She's inside," she said quietly. Alejandro stepped into the small living room and saw her. Lucia sat in a worn armchair by the window, sunlight illuminating strands of silver in her dark hair. Time had marked her face, but her eyes were the same, warm, deep, unforgettable. When she looked up and saw him, the color left her cheeks. "Alejandro?" she whispered, disbelief trembling in her voice. The silence that followed was heavy with years of misunderstanding. Camila looked between them, confused. "You know each other?" Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "He's your father," she said softly. The words crashed into Camila like a wave. Alejandro felt the ground disappear beneath him. He had built an empire, yet he had missed the most important chapter of his life. "You told me the baby wasn't mine," he said, his voice breaking as he looked at Lucia. She shook her head weakly. "I never said that. I tried to find you. You left without giving me a chance to explain. Your assistant told me you didn't want to see me again." Alejandro's mind replayed that period. His old assistant, the rumors, the forged letter he had received claiming Lucia had moved on. He had believed it all, because it was easier than confronting his fear of being trapped, of failing. His pride had cost him 25 years with his daughter. Camila stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she processed the truth. The powerful man who almost destroyed her workplace was the father, who never knew she existed. Alejandro slowly approached her. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, his voice trembling. "But if you'll allow me, I want to make up for every lost day." Camila searched his face for arrogance, for insincerity, but she saw only regret. "Money won't fix this," she said firmly. "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm not here as a millionaire. I'm here as a man who made the biggest mistake of his life." Days turned into weeks. Alejandro canceled the demolition of the restaurant. Instead, he invested in it, making Camila and her mother partners in the business. But more importantly, he kept showing up, not with gifts, but with time. He listened to stories he had missed, attended medical appointments with Lucia, and learned the small details of Camila's life. Her favorite books, her dreams, her fears. One evening, as the three of them sat together under the night sky, Camila looked at her wrist and then at her father. "You said the moon and star always find each other," she murmured. Alejandro nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "Even after the darkest night," he said. He realized then that success without love was emptiness disguised as achievement. The tattoo that once symbolized a broken promise had become proof that destiny can wait, but it never forgets. Camila eventually embraced him, not because he was rich, but because he was trying. And Alejandro understood that true wealth was not measured in billions, but in second chances. If this story moved you, if you believe in destiny, forgiveness, and the power of truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to face the past and rebuild what was lost. More unforgettable stories are waiting for you, right? Here, fame and fortune had never frightened Alejandro Rivas the way vulnerability did. In the weeks after discovering that Camila was his daughter, his life began to split into two parallel realities. By day, he was still Alejandro Rivas, the decisive tycoon whose signature could move markets and whose silence in board meetings made executives tremble. But by evening, he was simply a man learning how to be a father to a grown woman who had survived 25 years without him. And that was far more intimidating than any corporate battle. The media soon caught wind of the story. A journalist had spotted Alejandro entering the modest neighborhood several times in the same week. Speculation exploded. Headlines painted romantic scandals, secret affairs, and hidden heirs. His company's board grew nervous. Investors whispered about instability. Alejandro's right-hand director, Esteban Fuentes, warned him bluntly during a tense meeting. "Personal scandals destroy empires," Esteban said coldly. "You've worked decades to build this. Don't let emotions ruin it." Alejandro's eyes hardened. "My mistake was letting pride ruin my life once. I won't repeat it." But Esteban wasn't concerned about Alejandro's heart. He was concerned about control. For years, he had quietly manipulated information around Alejandro, including that forged letter from Lucia decades ago. Alejandro still didn't know the full truth, but pieces were beginning to surface. Meanwhile, Camila struggled with her own storm. Accepting Alejandro as her father was not simple. She had grown up watching her mother work double shifts, sacrifice dreams, and hide silent tears at night. Now the man who could have changed everything stood before her offering support. She wanted to trust him, but resentment lingered like a shadow. One evening at the restaurant, now flourishing after Alejandro's investment, Camila confronted him directly. "Why didn't you fight harder back then?" she asked, her voice steady but wounded. "If you loved my mother, why did you believe a rumor so easily?" Alejandro didn't defend himself. "Because I was weak," he admitted. "I was afraid of losing my ambitions. I convinced myself that walking away was strength. It wasn't, it was cowardice." Lucia, listening from a nearby table, felt both pain and relief hearing him finally speak the truth. But just as their fragile reconciliation began strengthening, the past returned with sharper claws. A former employee of Alejandro's company anonymously sent Camila documents, old internal memos showing that Esteban Fuentes had intercepted Lucia's attempts to contact Alejandro. There were records of phone calls blocked, letters never delivered, and one chilling note: "Ensure Ms. Morales does not reach Mr. Rivas again." Camila's hands trembled as she read the evidence. Rage surged through her, not at Alejandro this time, but at the calculated cruelty that had shaped their lives. She drove straight to her father's mansion that night. Alejandro listened in stunned silence as she laid the documents before him. Each page felt like a blade twisting into his memory. The betrayal was not romantic misunderstanding. It was orchestration. "Esteban!" Alejandro whispered, disbelief turning into fury. Lucia arrived shortly after, and together they pieced the truth. Esteban had feared that a family would soften Alejandro, distract him from aggressive expansion plans, so he eliminated the distraction. The realization paralyzed Alejandro, not because of business consequences, but because it confirmed something unbearable. He had allowed someone else to dictate his personal fate because he had valued ambition over love. The next morning, Alejandro called an emergency board meeting. In a room filled with polished wood and cold ambition, he placed the evidence on the table. "For years," he said calmly, "I believed loyalty built this empire. I was wrong." Esteban tried to deny it, but the documents were irrefutable. Security escorted him out as stunned executives watched the fall of a powerful strategist. Alejandro could have pressed criminal charges. Instead, he did something unexpected. "I don't want revenge," he told Camila later. Revenge stole enough years already. Camila studied him carefully. The man before her was changing, not into someone weaker, but into someone more human. Weeks passed. Alejandro began restructuring his company, prioritizing ethical leadership, transparency, and community investment. He created scholarships in Lucia's name. He funded healthcare programs for families like theirs. The media narrative shifted from scandal to redemption. But the most important transformation happened quietly. One night, under a clear sky painted with a silver crescent moon, Alejandro sat with Camila outside the house where she grew up. "I used to think success meant never looking back," he said softly. "Now I know it means having something worth returning to." Camila looked at her wrist, the moon and star inked permanently on her skin. "I spent years wishing for a father," she admitted. "Now I have one. But I don't need perfection. I just need honesty." Alejandro nodded. "You'll always have that." For the first time, Camila hugged him without hesitation. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. Lucia watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes, not of sorrow, but closure. The past had stolen years, but it hadn't destroyed destiny. Alejandro later made a decision that surprised everyone. He appointed Camila to oversee the foundation he created. Not because she was his daughter, but because she understood struggle. She initially resisted, doubting her qualifications. "I'm just a waitress," she insisted. "You're a survivor," Alejandro replied. "That's far more valuable." As months unfolded, the foundation flourished under Camila's leadership. She connected with people authentically, using her own story as proof that even shattered paths can realign. The tattoo that once triggered shock had become a symbol of restoration, not just of family, but of integrity. Alejandro eventually sold several luxury projects that would have displaced vulnerable communities. Investors protested, profits dipped temporarily, but Alejandro slept peacefully for the first time in decades. True wealth, he realized, was not accumulation, it was reconciliation. And on the anniversary of the night he first saw Camila's tattoo, the three of them returned to the restaurant after closing hours. Alejandro handed Camila a small framed sketch, the original drawing of the crescent moon and star. "I should have protected this promise," he said. Camila smiled gently. "You are now." As they stood together beneath the night sky, the moon shining softly above, Alejandro understood something profound. Destiny had not paralyzed him to punish him, it had stopped him to awaken him. The city had always respected Alejandro Rivas. Now, it was beginning to watch him, not with admiration, not with fear, but with curiosity. Powerful men are predictable when they chase money. They are dangerous when they chase redemption. 3 months after Esteban Fuentes' dismissal, Alejandro's company was undergoing a transformation that shook the corporate elite. Aggressive expansions were paused. Risk-heavy acquisitions were cancelled. Entire departments were restructured around transparency and community impact. Investors grumbled. Old allies distanced themselves. Alejandro didn't care. For the first time in his life, he was building something he wouldn't be ashamed to pass on to his daughter. Camila, however, was struggling in ways she hadn't expected. Running the foundation was nothing like serving tables. There were meetings, contracts, negotiations, press interviews. People addressed her as Señorita Rivas now, a surname that still felt foreign in her ears. Every time someone mentioned her father's name, she felt the weight of inherited privilege pressing against her identity. One evening, after a long day reviewing scholarship applications, she found herself back at the restaurant. It remained her sanctuary. The smell of coffee, the soft clatter of plates, the laughter of regular customers, it reminded her who she was before headlines and boardrooms. Alejandro entered quietly, without security. "You don't have to come here alone anymore," he said gently, sitting across from her. "I know," Camila replied. "That's exactly why I do." He understood. Lucia had warned him that rebuilding a relationship with a grown daughter required patience beyond pride. So he waited. He listened. He learned. But the past was not finished testing them. A rival business magnate, Ricardo Salvatierra, saw Alejandro's softening as weakness. Ricardo had competed with Alejandro for decades, losing more often than winning. When news of Alejandro's hidden daughter became public, Ricardo seized the opportunity. He launched a hostile campaign in the media, questioning Camila's qualifications and implying she was manipulating her father's guilt for financial gain. The headlines were brutal. Hidden heir reshapes empire. From waitress to executive overnight. Camila read every word, each one cut deep. I didn't ask for this, she told Alejandro, anger trembling beneath her composure. I didn't ask for your name. I didn't ask for this spotlight. I know, he said quietly, and I'm sorry. But apologies didn't stop the attacks. Ricardo's strategy escalated when he attempted to block one of Alejandro's major ethical redevelopment projects, a housing initiative that would provide affordable homes instead of luxury towers. Investors began withdrawing support under pressure. For the first time since their reunion, Alejandro felt the old temptation rising inside him, the ruthless instinct to crush opposition at any cost. He locked himself in his office one night, staring at the skyline through glass walls. The city lights glittered like ambition calling him back. He could destroy Ricardo financially. He had the resources, the connections, the experience. But then his eyes drifted to a framed photograph on his desk. Camila, laughing beside Lucia under the restaurant's neon sign. What kind of legacy was he rebuilding? The next morning, instead of retaliating with aggression, Alejandro did something unexpected. He scheduled a public press conference and invited Camila to stand beside him. The room buzzed with anticipation as cameras flashed. Ricardo's representatives sat smugly in the front row, expecting corporate warfare. Alejandro stepped to the podium. For years, he began calmly, I believed strength meant dominance. I was wrong. The room fell silent. My daughter did not inherit privilege. She inherited resilience. She earned her position through character, not bloodline. He then announced something no one anticipated, a transparency audit of his entire corporation, inviting public oversight on all foundation spending and redevelopment projects. Gasps rippled through the room. It was a bold move, risky, vulnerable, but it shifted the narrative instantly. Ricardo's smear campaign lost momentum. Investors who valued long-term stability returned. Public trust surged, and Camila realized something powerful that day. Her father wasn't fighting for control anymore. He was fighting for integrity. That night, she confronted him again. But this time, her voice was softer. You didn't retaliate, she said. I wanted to, he admitted honestly. Old habits don't disappear easily. What stopped you? He looked at her. You. The simplicity of his answer dissolved something inside her. Weeks later, the housing project broke ground. Families gathered at the site, hopeful and emotional. Lucia stood beside Alejandro and Camila as the first foundation stone was laid. Lucia squeezed Alejandro's hand. You've changed, she whispered. No, he replied thoughtfully. I've returned to who I should have been. But growth rarely comes without one final trial. Late one evening, Camila received an anonymous message. Proof that Ricardo had bribed city officials to delay permits for the housing project. Clear evidence, enough to destroy him. Anger flared within her. She rushed to Alejandro's office with the documents. This is it, she said. We can end him. Alejandro studied the papers silently. Years ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. But now, if we expose him, Alejandro said slowly, it must be for justice, not revenge. Camila paused. She realized the difference mattered. They turned the evidence over to legal authorities without press manipulation, without dramatic leaks. Ricardo was eventually investigated and removed from several boards. The scandal consumed his empire, not through Alejandro's aggression, but through truth. The city began seeing Alejandro Rivas differently, not as the untouchable tycoon, but as a man who had faced his greatest failure, himself, and chosen transformation. One quiet evening, months later, Camila sat with her father on the restaurant's rooftop. The crescent moon glowed above them, bright and steady. Do you regret it? She asked. Regret what? Letting ambition rule your life for so long. Alejandro took a long breath. I regret the years I lost with you. I don't regret the lessons that brought me back. Camila looked at her wrist, at the moon and star that had unknowingly connected them across decades. Then maybe, she said softly, the promise wasn't broken. It was delayed. Alejandro smiled, emotion shining in his eyes. Even after the darkest night, he repeated. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder, not out of obligation but choice. Below them, the restaurant buzzed with life. Families laughed. Glasses clinked. The future felt steady. Alejandro no longer feared vulnerability. Because he understood now. Empires built on pride crumble. But families rebuilt on truth endure. Success, Alejandro Rivas learned, is loud. Redemption is quiet. Nearly a year had passed since the night. A simple tattoo froze him in place and unraveled a lifetime of pride. The housing project was thriving. The restaurant had become a symbol of second chances. The foundation, under Camila's leadership, was funding scholarships, medical care, and small business grants for families who once believed no one saw them. On the surface, everything seemed restored. But healing does not erase scars. It teaches you how to live with them. Camila had stepped confidently into her role at the foundation, yet something inside her remained unsettled. She had forgiven her father, truly forgiven him, but forgiveness did not automatically create closeness. There were 25 birthdays he had missed, 25 years of scraped knees, school recitals, heartbreaks, and quiet victories he had never witnessed. And sometimes, in the stillness of night, that absence felt heavy. One evening, after finishing a long meeting about expanding the housing initiative to another district, Camila stayed behind in the foundation office. The staff had gone home. The building was silent. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph. Her mother had given her years ago. A picture of Lucia standing alone, pregnant, smiling bravely despite the uncertainty in her eyes. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Even if he never returns, you will be enough." Camila's chest tightened. Alejandro knocked gently on the glass door. He had started doing that, knocking before entering her space. Even though he owned the building. "Still working?" he asked softly. "Thinking," she replied. He noticed the photograph in her hand. "That was taken before I was born," she said quietly. "She never let me feel unwanted. Not once." Alejandro swallowed hard. "She's stronger than I ever deserved." Camila looked at him carefully. "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if you hadn't left?" Every parent fears that question. Alejandro didn't rush his answer. "Yes," he admitted. "But I've stopped wishing to rewrite the past. I'm focused on not failing the present." It wasn't a perfect response, but it was honest, and honesty had become the foundation of everything between them. Meanwhile, Lucia had been undergoing treatment for her chronic heart condition, something she had hidden for years while working tirelessly to raise Camila. Now, with proper medical care funded by the foundation, her health had stabilized. But doctors warned that surgery might eventually be necessary. Alejandro attended every appointment. He sat quietly in waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and uncertainty, remembering how many hospital visits he had missed before even knowing they existed. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult consultation, Lucia asked him to stay behind while Camila stepped out to speak with a nurse. "You carry too much guilt," Lucia said gently. "I carry what I deserve," he replied. She shook her head. "Guilt can be a bridge, or it can be a prison. Don't let it trap you." Alejandro looked at the woman he once loved, the woman who had raised his daughter, alone without bitterness poisoning her heart. "How did you forgive me?" he asked. Lucia smiled faintly. "Because holding anger would have made me raise Camila with resentment. And she deserved better than that." That night, Alejandro lay awake in his mansion, staring at the ceiling. The house no longer felt like a symbol of success. It felt too large, too empty. So he made a decision. A week later, he called Camila and Lucia to the restaurant after closing. The staff gathered curiously as Alejandro stood near the counter where Camila had once nervously served him coffee. "I built an empire chasing permanence," he began. "Buildings, contracts, assets, but permanence isn't found in concrete." Camila frowned slightly, unsure where this was going. Alejandro slid a folder across the table toward her. Inside were legal documents. He had transferred majority ownership of the restaurant and a significant portion of the foundation directly to Camila, not as inheritance, but as present trust. "I don't want you to wait for someday," he said. "This is yours now, fully." Camila stared at him in disbelief. "Dad, this is too much." "It's not enough," he replied softly. "But it's a beginning." The word dad lingered in the air. It was the first time she had said it naturally. Alejandro felt something inside him settle, not triumph, not pride, but peace. Yet life rarely allows serenity without testing its strength. 2 weeks later, Lucia collapsed at home. The surgery could no longer wait. The hospital corridors felt colder than ever before. Camila sat beside her mother's bed, gripping her hand tightly. Alejandro stood on the other side, feeling the weight of helplessness crush him in ways money never could fix. As doctors prepared Lucia for surgery, she reached for both of them. No matter what happens, she whispered. Promise me something. Camila's eyes filled with tears. Anything. Stay united. Alejandro nodded firmly. We will. Hours stretched endlessly in the waiting room. Alejandro replayed every choice of his youth, every ambition-driven decision that had cost him time. He realized something profound in that sterile silence. We spend our lives believing we have time. Time to apologize. Time to change. Time to love properly. But time is the one asset no empire can guarantee. When the surgeon finally emerged, Camila stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled. The surgery had been successful. Relief flooded the room like sunlight after a storm. Alejandro exhaled deeply, emotion overtaking him. Camila instinctively leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her without hesitation. Not as a businessman protecting an image, not as a man correcting a mistake, but as a father terrified of losing his family again. Lucia's recovery was slow but steady. During those quiet days at home, something beautiful happened. The three of them began creating ordinary memories, cooking together, arguing playfully over recipes, watching old films, laughing at stories from Camila's childhood that Alejandro was hearing for the first time. One evening, while sorting through old belongings, Camila found a small wooden box among Lucia's things. Inside was the original napkin, the first sketch of the crescent moon and star Alejandro had drawn decades ago. Lucia had kept it all these years. Alejandro's hands trembled as he held it. I thought I lost this, he whispered. Lucia smiled weakly from the couch. I never did. Camila looked at both of them and realized something powerful. Love had never truly left. It had simply waited. Months later, on the anniversary of the night Alejandro first saw the tattoo on Camila's wrist, they organized a community celebration at the housing complex. Families gathered under string lights. Children ran freely across safe playgrounds, built where luxury towers once threatened to rise. Alejandro stood before the crowd, but this time, he didn't speak about projects or profits. He spoke about choices. I once believed success meant standing alone at the top, he said. Now I know the greatest success is standing beside the people. You love without fear, without pride. Camila squeezed his hand. Above them, the crescent moon shone clearly in the sky, a single bright star resting near its curve. The promise had not been erased by time. It had matured. As the night ended, Camila turned to her father. You know, she said thoughtfully, if you hadn't walked into that restaurant, none of this would have happened. Alejandro smiled gently. Sometimes destiny waits for the right moment to interrupt us. And that interruption had changed everything. Happiness,